what was most loving to me was to peel back the layers of what got me to the point of this rhino moment, to actually take responsibility for no more and no less than just the part that I could take responsibility for. That was the most courageous thing that I've ever done. Okay, so in the last solo episode, we talked about this first part of a conversation I wanted to bring to the podcast about what it looks like to actually do the work. It was something that was like this concept that I guess I kind of understood, but until I was thrust into this season that like the work showed up at my doorstep, or at least the invitation to do the work. I don't know that a year ago I really understood what that term meant. So I want to ground this second part in a little bit more of the tangible things that I did that really supported me in the season of healing that I've been through over the last year. And I want to preface it by saying this, part of the reason why I have shied away from sharing even just like the specific people that I work with, or whenever people ask like, well, who's your therapist? Who's this, who's that? I love to bring those people on the podcast. You're going to hear from a lot of them on the podcast, but I want to preface it by saying, I believe that part of this healing journey and part of accepting the invitation to go into your own healing is you're accepting an invitation to connect more deeply with your own intuition. And your intuition is going to bring the right people and the right influences into your path. So I say that because what I don't want people to do is think that this is like a template for their healing. This is the template for Lindsay's journey. You're going to hear certain things in this that just kind of pique your interest or ask you to dive in deeper. And I really want you to pay attention to that, because no healing journey is linear. No two healing journeys are the same. But I'll also try to kind of pull out the overarching themes of each of these pieces of the healing process so that you can hear what you need to hear for your own. But we were talking in the last episode about that invitation moment, whether it's that nudge, the knock, or the rhino, as my friend Carly calls it. Mine just happened to be a pretty big fucking rhino. But here's the first piece of what that healing process looked like for me. I remember it was actually before I confirmed that there was for sure infidelity going on. And it kind of feels really vulnerable to share this, but I think it's an important part of the story. And I share it because I really want people to get the nuances of what this process looks like. I don't want it to be about what happened or what someone else did. But I just remember, speaking of intuition, listen, someone is gonna sneak around on an intuitive woman. We're just gonna find out how intuitive we really are. So my intuition was really loud that there was, something going on. And I just remember having this moment where I knew I needed to go and be by myself and just really listen. Before I even confronted, before I even could face the weight of what I thought I was probably going to find when I did confront. And this will forever be, I think, just the most sacred 3 days of my entire life. I don't think I've shared this story with anyone outside of like my 5 closest friends. So I remember waking up one morning and it was just this sense of I needed to get away. And I went, a couple hours away, like stayed in the woods. I think, being in nature always really grounds me. And I sat with what was my biggest fear. That was essentially what I was sitting with. I had to be with my own fear of being abandoned, of being betrayed, of not being chosen, and of being alone. And I remember, going away and journaling and I cried for 3 days straight of just allowing myself to actually access the emotions underneath facing the truth. So when I talked in the last episode about, just the courage that it really takes to accept an invitation to grow and to expand, especially because accepting that invitation means meeting parts of yourself you've probably been afraid to meet. I think it's necessary to clear space for that. It wouldn't have been as powerful if I tried to process all of that in my normal everyday life. It needed space. It was sacred. So what I did was I just journaled. I journaled what was coming up for me. I journaled what what my actual fears were. I went on really long walks and I just listened. I spoke out loud, whether you have a faith practice and you're talking to God or you're talking to the universe. And I just, I asked, it was such tender questions, why? Why? What did I do? What did I do to deserve this? Why is this happening? And without getting audible answers back, what I just remember feeling was that I was so held. I was just so held. And I think I needed to feel that sense. I think clearing space and, being in nature in a place that really grounds me allowed me to feel how held I was. So I knew I had the courage to dive in even deeper to what I was being invited into. And that will forever be something that I know set me up to navigate this last season in a much different way than if I had stayed in, the initial moment of any kind of shock puts you into fight or flight. It literally robs you of your safety. And we don't do our best thinking from that place. We're not as connected. We can't hear our intuition as well when we're in that place. So that was profound. On the other side of that, actually, while I was still there, it was this little question was just birthed in my heart and soul that has been my guiding light throughout the last year. It'll probably be my guiding light for the rest of my life. And it was just this question of, what is most loving to me right now? What is most loving to me? And especially for any of you who maybe your invitation is rooted in the realization, a lot of this is realizing for the first time patterns that have been a part of your life that maybe you were unaware of, especially if you are healing some codependency and healing this sense of thinking you have to overgive in order to earn or deserve love. Bringing that love back to yourself is going to be part of your healing process. It's going to be part of your expansion process. And I realized that so much of my relationship dynamic is kind of where my lesson was, but I just want you to map this onto whatever area of your life your invitation is showing up in. For my relationship part of my life specifically, I realized I was starting to see the beginnings of just how much everything was run through the filter of, who do I have to be so this person doesn't leave? Or so I just don't have to face being alone. It was all focused on other people. In this case, my former partner. So directing that back to myself and instead asking the question first, what is most loving to me in this scenario, started to give me clarity for the next steps. So again, I think what we often are searching for, especially when we're disoriented, we're dysregulated. We literally are dysregulated. Our nervous system is seeking safety. Asking that question brought me back to my truth. It gave me clarity because your mind is going to be searching for, okay, somebody give me the next steps. So if you're listening to this episode hoping that Lindsay's going to have the next steps, the good news and the bad news is that I don't have your next steps, but I can tell you how I got to mine. So this question of what's most loving to me. So it started with, what's most loving to me is to confront this head on, to just have a really honest conversation and to let that unfold. then it became, what's most loving to me is to leave this relationship. It's not honoring the version of partnership that I really want for myself, and big boundaries were crossed. And this is not, as much as I would love for this to be a scenario that is a wake-up call for two people who decide to do their own work and grow together and come back together, that wasn't. I could only control my side of the equation. So the most loving thing for me to do was to file for divorce. And then it just became this constant evolution and this constant checkpoint of what is most loving to me. So in that question, I now kind of was thrust into this season of leaving my marriage. I left my home. I left everything physically that represented safety. And in the next season, and this was over the summer, and people had no idea this was all going on leading up to the Powerhouse Women event. At the Powerhouse Women event, I remember the Monday after the event, everyone on social media saw this event, 800 people, this, amazing, and it was amazing. And then I was like thrust right back into the reality of dealing what I was dealing with. And I had to go and clean out our homes that we were selling, and just so shocked with the remembrance that I was still very much just in it. I was in my own transformation process. And so what I want to speak to is also what it looks like to still show up for yourself, and to show up for a lot of your business owners while you're navigating something like this. And so I shared on a previous episode a little bit about this, but what that actually looked like what it looked like to do my own healing work, but then also continue to do the work that I get paid to do, because I didn't have the ability to just pull completely back. I had to still support myself and support myself financially, if you know what I mean. So a lot of batching ahead with my team, letting my closest people know what was going on so they could support me in working ahead, so then I could completely pull back. And a lot of people didn't know that. I batched all my podcasts. I did everything I could and just locked in for a couple of days so I could get that all planned ahead and give myself the time. Again, what was most loving to me was to give myself time to actually process through what I was feeling. You may not have the ability to completely pull back like that if you have to show up at a job, or you have life commitments that are really demanding you to still show up. The version of this I want you to take away is, where can you ask for an uncomfortable amount of support? Where can you allow people to show up for you? Where can you renegotiate your commitments and give yourself as much space as possible? How much space all of us need to process is going to be different. But what I've learned is, I would keep myself in these prisons of, okay, this is the way it has to be. I made these commitments. I planned this trip. I have to go. No, you don't. Really, you don't. I guess, especially if you're an entrepreneur, I was wait, no, I make the rules. I created these have tos. So where can I renegotiate them? Where can I be honest with people? I just need to pull back. And so in that season of just really going inward, that was the first thing I did, that it just was everything, because it gave me space to do this next part that I wanted to also talk about, which is, especially if you're in the kind of rhino moment or the kind of invitation where you feel like a victim to your circumstances, and maybe you are, it takes so much courage, but also this is where the actual growth is to own your part in it. And no part of me wanted to own that I had anything to do with someone else choosing to have an affair. And I don't take responsibility for anyone else's actions. However, if I stayed in that place, and for a while I was really in it. And I just wanted everyone to know what happened. And I'm laughing because I'm like, I just remember this version of myself. We just kept a lid on her. Okay. This is not the time to be sharing this on social media. This is not the time to be like processing this out loud. And I really say that with so much love, because had I processed that version of it publicly, I would feel differently about it now. I think I would wish that I hadn't, when it's like in that raw form. And I remember just feeling again, like this intuition that what was most loving to me was to actually start to peel back the layers of what got me to the point of this rhino moment, to actually take responsibility for no more and no less than just the part that I could take responsibility for. And knowing, and I can say it now with complete certainty, that was where my freedom was. That was the most courageous thing that I've ever done. And a couple of the tools that have helped me, I did over the summer, and I had him on the podcast. David Guillaume is his name. I found his content and I did his Kabbalah 1, 2, 3. I probably did all of his courses. But essentially, like, Kabbalah is, this spiritual wisdom, and it's not like tied to a certain religion. Anyone who kind of has a little bit, you're like, I don't know if that like is against what I believe. What I actually found, especially growing up in the Christian church, it mirrors everything that I already believed. It just puts it in a package that allowed me to really see my opportunities for growth. I mean, it was the most confronting thing I've ever done, because it didn't let me spiritually bypass my healing. It didn't let me just stay in that victim place. And it was a process over time, but whatever that is for you, maybe it's working with a coach, working with a mentor. I want to say, because this is my belief, again, you could have a different experience of this, but that is where the actual healing happens, in the moments of radical authenticity and honesty with yourself, and ownership of the part we play in our own suffering. And this isn't to say, please hear me, if you are someone who has been the survivor of actual abuse, if you've been a survivor of, things that are unfathomable, I'm not talking about that. But I think those of us, I want you to hear your own version of this and what I'm saying. We all play a role in our own suffering in one way or another. And the most loving thing that we can do is to get to the point of having enough courage, having enough honesty to look at that, because that was the beginning of my actual freedom. And being able to find, I don't even know if I would call it forgiveness as much as I would call it, you know what it was? It was self-forgiveness. Having the courage to have the honesty about the role that I played, and the self-forgiveness is where the freedom really started to unfold. And then, it was this continued testing of these decisions that I had made, that I wasn't going to be a victim, that I was going to take responsibility for my part in, every area of my life that I hadn't been happy. And then this is the final part. And it's like the part I wish didn't exist. Like, I thought that was enough work. But then you have to be tested. You're going to be tested. It's like just at the moment that I was like, okay, I've got some completion around this. I feel I feel like I've kind of, it was almost like the grip that my wanting to be a victim and wanting, a victim of just the circumstances. And I wanted to feel sorry for myself. Like the grip of that had started to loosen, and I started to feel in my power again, because I had been willing to face so much of that. Then I was mirrored and tested with, okay, but are you really rooted in this new sense of self-worth? Like, are you really rooted in it? So tests can show up in, it's like the same energy of the thing you just broke through, but it shows up. I like to joke, this is in my mind, just go with me. It's like all of our deepest fears tend to have kind of certain triggers that are with us for life, right? And my experience has been, it's like that trigger will show up and then I kind of like defeat it and I move through it. But then it just shows up again like a few months later, but in a different outfit. Like now it's wearing a top hat, like it's wearing a disguise. And now it's like trying to masquerade as a different one. You're like, wait, I know you. Or like that scene in Bridesmaids where she's like sitting in first class with the big sunglasses trying to pretend like she's Mrs. Iglesias. So it's like that, it's like our fears just come up and they try to, what they're doing is, this is actually the moment that you really get to root down in the breakthrough that you just created. It's just like building a muscle. You don't build that muscle after one workout. You keep working on that. And then eventually you realize like that trigger doesn't actually show up anymore. You get to a point where like you pass the tests like enough times in a row that you don't really feel the same trigger in the same way. And then you get to evolve right into new triggers, and who knows, maybe I'll let you know if they come back in different top hats. But the triggering and like the testing piece is an important part of it. And I wish someone would have like prepared me for that. That's where like the reinforcement of the growth that I had embodied really came from. And then this last piece is kind of it's like this part I'm like pinky toe in the door of, which is I had seen this reel. And I think, again, this is going to apply to different people differently, but I'll share what really resonated with me and how I'm working with this energy is essentially what this gentleman said. It was this Instagram reel, is that part of the healing process is to decide that it's complete. And to decide that you've done the work and you're ready to get back out there with your new set of skills, knowing that like healing as a general construct is never complete. Like until the day we die, we're going to be healing and growing and evolving. But what that meant to me was like around just the absolute devastation and heartbreak of a 15-year relationship ending, my home, it completely reset my financial life, like down to zero. And, all of these things that I thought represented safety, getting to that point where I realized safety is in here. It's in me. Like that's where safety actually lies. So I appreciate the exterior stuff, but I don't need them in the same way. And now they can come back. They're free to come back into my life, and I can have the right relationship with them. But I noticed that, and I'm saying this because I know I'm speaking to my fellow personal development junkies, I could have easily used my healing as a way to continue to distract myself from actually just stepping into my next season and like putting myself out there. And who knows, we'll cross the dating bridge when that comes. But like all these fears that I had and still have were almost becoming now this reason to just like, well, maybe I just need to take one more course, or maybe I need to do like one more session with my therapist, or, maybe healing happens, down the road. And I realized I was kind of like waiting for this moment to just be healed. And I'm using air quotes. Instead of realizing that like the healing comes to life when we have the courage to start putting ourselves back into especially the places where we feel like we're most vulnerable and afraid of being hurt again. So what I'm learning about this whole journey is that, one phase of the healing was going into all the things that I just shared. This next phase of healing is realizing that now I have to, if I really want, the big expanded life that I was calling in, and we have come this far, friends, so like we're going after all of it, is, do I trust myself enough to now have the courage to go back into the places that I was so afraid of being hurt and disappointed, and what if that happens again? And I'm not saying that that's easy, because it's not. I'm still like sweating profusely right now just at the thought of it. But also in just this little, like again, the pinky toe in the door of, I guess, transitioning into this next phase of healing and just saying like, yeah, that part's complete. And now let me experience myself with these new skills, is I'm realizing what you build in this healing process is you build a sense of trust with yourself. That's where you find the safety, is trusting yourself that, okay, I can't control whether or not I'm ever in a situation where I feel betrayed, abandoned, or any of that again, rejected. But what I can control is that I trust myself to know how to support myself. I trust myself and my new sense of self-worth to remove myself quickly from situations where I've overstayed in the past. And something clicked just this week where I realized that is the prize. And so when I said at the end of the last episode, I'm going to say again, because I wish this would have existed for me a year ago as I was entering into this tender and sacred journey, is that I just want you to know how much you deserve to meet the version of yourself that is waiting for you on the other side. And that version of you is truth. Like, that is the one you've been waiting for all along. And you don't get to fast forward through all of the messy parts, but because you don't get to fast forward or bypass the really challenging parts of this journey, the self-confidence, the self-worth, the trust in you that you build on the other side cannot be taken away. And that's ultimately what I wanted for myself. That's what I want for all of you. And for anyone else who's in any stage of this process, I just want to remind you that you are so not alone.